it didn't start with an explosion. It started with darkness. No heat, no water, no sound. In southeastern Ukraine, more than 1 million people suddenly lost the basics of life in winter. This was not an accident. This was not random damage. This was deliberate. I'm Fareed Zakaria. And what you are witnessing is not just another moment in the Ukraine war. It is a demonstration of how power works in the 21st century. Russia is no longer trying only to defeat an army. It is trying to exhaust a society. Missiles hit power stations, water systems shut down, hospitals switch to backup generators. The battlefield is no longer land. It is endurance. And the real question is not who advances. The question is, how long can a country function in the cold and the dark? Stay with me. Because to understand this, we must first understand what kind of war this has become. This war is often described in simple terms. Territory gained, territory lost, maps with arrows moving forward or backward. But that framing misses the point. What is happening in Ukraine today is not a traditional war of conquest. It is a war of systems, electricity, water, heating, logistics. These are not side issues. They are the core battlefield. When Russia strikes energy infrastructure, it is not aiming for a quick victory. It is aiming for something slower and more corrosive, to force a modern society into permanent crisis mode. When power fails, everything else weakens. Hospitals strain, industry slows, daily life becomes fragile, and winter amplifies all of it. Cold is not just weather. Cold is pressure. This is why energy has become a weapon. Not symbolic, not secondary, strategic. To understand how this became possible, we need to look backward at the origins of this strategy and the cycle that produced it. To understand this moment, we have to go back, not years, but cycles. As the war entered its later stages, something changed. Russia did not achieve a decisive breakthrough on the battlefield. Progress became slow, costly, incremental, so the strategy adapted. Instead of focusing only on soldiers, attention shifted to systems, energy systems, infrastructure, civilian lifelines. Ukraine, like all modern states, depends on a fragile balance. Electricity powers water. Water sustains cities. Heat keeps people alive in winter. That dependency became a vulnerability. As winter approached, the logic hardened. Cold increases pressure. Darkness drains morale. Time favors the attacker who can wait. This is why strikes intensified during harsh weather. Snow and frost were no longer background conditions. They became force multipliers. What looks like chaos is not chaos. It is a pattern. And then that pattern produced its first visible breaking point. Then came the moment when the system cracked. Not everywhere, but enough. In southeastern Ukraine, the strikes landed. Power stations were hit. Water systems failed. More than 1 million people were suddenly without heat and water. For hours in winter, hospitals switched to backup power. Water facilities ran on emergency systems. Authorities urged people to limit electricity use. This was the crisis Russia was testing for. Not collapse, stress. The kind of stress that reveals limits. The head of Ukraine's largest private energy company said something striking. The attacks were so frequent, he said, there was no time to recover. That sentence matters because it tells us the goal is not destruction in one blow. It is exhaustion over time. If this analysis helps you see the war more clearly, stay with me. What looks like chaos is actually calculation. To understand why this pressure works, we have to expose the hidden mechanism behind it. Behind these attacks is a simple mechanism, and it is brutally effective. Energy systems are designed for efficiency, not for war. They are centralized, interconnected, optimized for normal conditions. That makes them fragile under sustained attack. You don't need to destroy everything. You only need to strike faster than repairs can be made. That is why the attacks come in waves. Drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, each wave forces repairs. Each repair consumes time, people, and spare parts. Eventually, recovery falls behind damage. This is why Ukraine's energy sector is in permanent crisis mode. Not because engineers lack skill, but because the system is being pushed past its limits. There is no military advantage in this, President Zelensky says. And he is right in a traditional sense, but this is not traditional warfare. This is pressure warfare. And when pressure builds long enough, it does not stay confined to infrastructure. It spreads to people. Then came the second escalation, not louder, but deeper. As winter tightened its grip, the strikes intensified again, not to surprise, but to overwhelm. Ukraine's leaders warned of new massive Russian strikes, timed carefully. Heavy snow, freezing temperatures, weather became part of the plan. This was no longer about damage alone. It was about timing. Cold slows repairs. Cold magnifies outages. Cold turns hours without power into a threat. Russia was testing something again. Not the grid, but resilience. How much pressure can be applied before systems fail permanently? How much cold can people endure before fatigue sets in? This is escalation without headlines. No single dramatic collapse, just relentless strain. And this is where the war moves closest to you, the ordinary person living through it. Now, let me speak directly to you. Imagine waking up in the cold, your phone barely charged, your apartment silent, no heat, no running water. You are not thinking about geopolitics. You are thinking about your family, your children, your parents. Hospitals are still open, but they are running on backup power. Every minute matters. You are told to limit electricity use, not because you wasted energy, but because the system is stretched thin. This is how war enters daily life. Quietly, relentlessly. President Zelensky calls this mockery. And he is right, because the target is not soldiers. It is your endurance. If you are still watching, share this, not to spread fear, but to spread understanding, because what happens to one country under this pressure does not stay there. What is happening in Ukraine does not stop at its borders. Energy systems are not just national assets. They are part of global stability. When a country's infrastructure is pushed to the edge, the effects travel outward. Markets react. Supply chains tighten. Allies reassess risk. This war has shown something uncomfortable. Modern economies are vulnerable in the same way. Energy dependence creates leverage. Weather amplifies pressure. Time becomes a strategic tool. European allies are watching closely, not just out of solidarity, but out of self-interest, because this is a preview. If infrastructure can be weaponized here, it can be weaponized elsewhere. Not tomorrow, but someday. This is why negotiations matter, and why guarantees matter even more. Words without protection change very little. So where does this lead? There are only a few paths forward, and none are simple. From here, the future narrows to three possible paths. The first is the optimistic one. Pressure forces serious negotiations. Energy attacks slow. A settlement begins to take shape. In this scenario, systems hold long enough for diplomacy to work, not because the war ends cleanly, but because exhaustion creates compromise. The second path is more likely. The war drags on. Strikes continue. Repairs continue. No collapse. No breakthrough. Just a society living in permanent uncertainty, functioning, but never recovering. Then there is the third path, the darkest one. Infrastructure damage compounds. Recovery falls behind permanently. Pressure overwhelms resilience. In that world, winter is not a season. It is a weapon that never stops. history shows something important. Systems rarely fail all at once. They fail gradually. Then suddenly, and this brings us to the final question, what this war is ultimately teaching us. This war is teaching us something uncomfortable. Power today is not just about tanks or territory. It is about systems and who can endure longer when those systems are under attack. Russia understands this. Ukraine is living through it. Peace talks are happening, proposals are circulating, deadlines are whispered. But none of that changes one basic truth. A society cannot negotiate if it cannot function. And resilience is now the most valuable asset Ukraine has. President Zelensky believes this war could end in the first half of 2026. That may be true, or it may not. What matters is what happens until then. Because every blackout is a test. Every cold night is a message, not just to Ukraine, but to the world. If this analysis helped you see the war differently, stay connected. Share it. Follow for what comes next. Because the next phase of this conflict will not be decided by headlines. It will be decided by systems and by the people forced to live without them. And that story is not over.